Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Aquademia podcast. I'm Sean O'Laughlin.
I'm Justin Grant.
And I'm Maddie Cassidy.
And welcome to the new year. This is the first episode for 2022.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
I hope everyone's feeling good and recovered from their New Year festivities. And I hope you're excited to dive into a pretty awesome topic. We are talking with Steve Hedlund, who's the communications and events manager here at GSA. And we're also speaking with Ian Roberts from MOE. And we are diving into the topic of shockumentary media.
We're starting the year off strong.
That's right. Yeah. This is a cool episode with some really fascinating stories. And we're talking about a topic that is just super interesting and pretty controversial, but I think we did it in a pretty diplomatic way. So I think you're going to enjoy it. But
we think.
Hopefully. Before we get into it, you know what we got to do. I got to remind you to please subscribe to Aquademia wherever you listen to podcasts so you can get every new episode directly downloaded onto your device as soon as it's available.
Yeah, and if you want to follow us on Twitter, do so at Aquademia Pod. If you want to contact us, fill out the form located at globalseafood.org/podcast.
And if you enjoyed the episode today, we would love you forever if you write a rating and review on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on.
Maddie, did you enjoy the episode today?
This was one of the best episodes ever, honestly.
Sadly, Maddie was not able to join us for the recording of this episode, so you won't, it's very sad, but you won't hear her voice in this recording, but we wanted to make sure we got her in the intro, so you did get to hear Maddie's lovely voice as you started.
Start your new year off right.
That's right.
You don't listen to the show because of Sean and I.
That's right. So enjoy this episode, and we will talk to you at the end.
Welcome to the Aquademia podcast.
Our diet is hurting the environment in myriad ways. I mean, we desperately need to eat more seafood.
This is a pioneering industry with a whole lot of people who have really good ideas and a lot of experience and are unafraid.
Aquademia is your go-to podcast for a fresh take on all things seafood.
All right, so we're sitting down today with Ian Roberts from MOE and our very own Steve Hedlund, returning champion from here at GSA, who is, Steve, you are the communications manager here at GAA, correct?
Correct, communications and events manager.
And yep. Ian, what is your title at MOE?
My title now is Director of Communications for both Scotland and Canada, but actually being a salmon farmer in my past life, about 30 years ago, I started as a scuba diver and fish feeder.
All right, so this is going to be a really super interesting conversation because we are talking about something that Steve coined to me as shockumentaries. And I don't know if that's an industry term or something that you came up with. I know it was used in this article that we're going to reference here, but we have seen some media coming out recently that in documentary form that's very shocking, and it's termed shockumentaries. And we started having a conversation with Steve saying that would be a really interesting topic to talk about on the podcast. And he said, well, there was this article in C West News that interviewed Ian Roberts. Maybe we can get him on the show to talk about it too. And we had an initial phone call with Ian, and he just dropped all kinds of bombs on us that we thought this is going to be awesome. It's going to be a great episode. People are really going to find it interesting. So here we are. Ian, thank you so much for joining us. Steve, thanks for taking the time out of your day to sit in with us too. And I think, Steve, can you just kind of give a quick synopsis on why we're deciding to tackle this topic?
I think because of the emergence of so-called shockumentaries, there's a push, particularly from the vegan community to attack the aquaculture community and the fisheries community.
Yeah, the seafood community as a whole.
In general. Yeah, in general. I think the purpose here really is, for us communicators and marketers in the industry, how do we best represent ourselves? How do we be more proactive and less reactive, and getting out in front of what we would consider to be negative information, or perhaps misleading or false
information.
So,
yeah. And I want to. We're not going to talk too specifically about any specific documentaries that have come out there, but I think to give people kind of an idea of what we're talking about. I'm sure some of our listeners are familiar with the documentary Seaspiracy from Netflix. And then there's this new one coming out. What is the new one called?
Eating Our Way to Extinction.
Right. Eating Our Way to Extinction. Ian, you are pretty familiar with this stuff because you've had some kind of hands-on experiences with this. So give us your initial take on this topic and kind of how you feel generally and then we can kind of go into some of your experiences that you've had to talk about kind of how this media is being used and being produced and why.
Yeah, be happy to talk about some specific examples, but just generally, I moved from the farms to public relations and communications in around 2008 because I was personally frustrated with the narrative. And keep in mind, I was farming in British Columbia, and if anybody follows the seafood industry and salmon farming, they'll see the kind of issues that have been happening around social license and government decisions in British Columbia. So I took it upon myself, and my company, Moe, then was creating an internal media department. So fortunately, I'm probably the only one that put up my hand for it, sucker I am, and took on the job. And over the last 12 or 13 years, there's been numerous programs, whether it be Jean-Michel Cousteau, Jacques Cousteau's son. Back in 2009, there was 60 Minutes in about 2014. Canada's 60 Minutes is W5. That happened a few years ago. And then lately, these two films that you mentioned, Seaspiracy and Eating Our Way to Extinction. And what I've seen is, just generally an invitation to participate in these films back when, but knowing that the editing floor can be cruel to you. So, if you kind of smash it out the park on behalf of aquaculture, you might not end up in the particular program. And if you drop the ball, you might feature highly in the program. So that's always the risk you take. But more recently, and this isn't new, and it certainly isn't specific to the seafood sector. If I think of a filmmaker that kind of moved from funny comedies, would be a fellow named Michael Moore, which many people know of in America. I mean, I loved his film Canadian Bacon. It was just a funny comedy about America trying to start a war with Canada. It was brilliant. And then he moved to these documentaries where I realized early on it really wasn't a fair setup. Someone was meant to fail. It was a pre-scripted documentary, and it didn't matter, what the protagonist said, it was going to be the same conclusion. And we've seen these Michael Moore type documentaries creep into our sector now, the latest being Seaspiracy and Eating Our Way to Extinction, when really we were given zero opportunity to speak on camera, which is new to me. I realize, there may be an invitation to get on. There may be heavy editing happen in the editing room, but today we're seeing us completely excluded from the conversation, which is frustrating from a consumer's point of view, where you're trying to find the facts, especially around food. It's such a hot topic. Yeah. People want to know about where their food comes from,
and when you rope in the social issues in there too. I mean, there's a lot of that. It looks like there's a lot of that in these two. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I want to, before we get too far into the specific media, I want to talk about documentaries in general. I'm glad you brought that up, specifically with like the, Michael Moore kind of, I guess he kind of founded this type of documentary that we're seeing a lot of. But, by definition, in theory, a documentary is supposed to just present facts, right? It's supposed to just be, we're giving you, I think the idea is that it's an unbiased, like, fact-giving medium, when, of course, every single documentary is given with with an agenda in mind. Everybody has a side because we're human and we have emotions, and it's hard to be completely objective. And so I think one of the issues with how they're received here, a lot of these documentaries, even like the true crime documentaries that you see that have gotten wildly popular over the few years, they also have a very specific viewpoint, and they are trying to convince you of something. It's not just giving you facts. It's a convincing argument for or against something. And I think a lot of people, they're viewing it as entertainment, and then they're taking it at face value, in that they're not considering that this filmmaker is coming to it with a very, very specific point of view, and probably very strong belief one way or another, or else there's no reason for them to really have the passion to make that documentary. And so, that's why it's going to seem really, really one-sided, especially when you're on the side that it's kind of going against. So just want to kind of talk like that. That's just all documentaries, right?
Yeah. I must admit, I mean, I came from it from a very naive thought where a documentary was kind of a road of discovery, right? You're starting out on a subject and you're learning as you go. And, in an hour and a half, you and the director have come to a conclusion based on all the evidence. And now I've realized that Yeah, it's a bit of a scripted movie, and the evidence is going to be provided to the audience that kind of proves the hypothesis. And I tell you, I look at most of what I watch now on Netflix and other streaming platforms with a critical eye, which I don't know if many people just have the experience like we do and others in the food business, at least, that would look at this as critically as we do.
Yeah.
That's the key, I think. And I'm trying to bite my tongue here as much as possible because I have some strong opinions on this topic, but as a video editor myself, I know the power of, it's very easy, believe it or not, to
elicit emotions.
Yes. Yeah. There are strings that you can, heartstrings, emotion strings that you can edit into your film, and it's very easy to sway people. So Ian, to your point, watching something, what I hope people get out of this episode, one is when you watch something, watch it from that critical perspective. Take it at face value, but then do more research if you're really passionate about what they're trying to portray, because there's more information out there. You can't just believe one film, one documentary, whatever it is. And I think that's important even reading the news nowadays, especially in America. There's multiple outlets, and you have to pick and choose or read them all and kind of make your own conclusion. But to me, it's just a little bit frustrating when there's a documentary out there that people do take for face value and they leave out key facts. It can be misleading. But again, I don't want to go down the road of my true emotions, so I'll try to sit back and continue to listen to all the three of you.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I kind of interrupted us and took us on another tangent. Ian, I don't know if you remember where you were where you're headed. If you want to continue your thought,
I'll age myself here, and instead of people trying to do the math, I'm 50 years old. Big revelation, which means I grew up in the 80s, right at that time. And Steve, you'll probably remember, is when the wild fisheries capped at around 90,000 or 90 million tons a year, and aquaculture was just being discussed. And my interest was actually aquariums. And, our take of these aquarium fish just couldn't continue from the wild. We had to start breeding them in captivity. And then it transferred to food fish, and I went to school for aquaculture. But a big influence on me back then was Jacques Cousteau. Jacques Cousteau talking about the evolution of moving from capture fisheries to actually farming the seas. And it was a brilliant quote. My first instance into this was 2009 when I mentioned his son, Jean-Michel Cousteau, was doing a documentary in British Columbia. And we heard that he was up in our area kind of making a link between, wild salmon runs depleting and the link between sea lice and the link between whales and this whole story. So I called a production company up in California and just said, I understand you may be doing a story that may be speaking about us. Would you be interested to come to the farm? And they seemed shocked that I asked. It was a revelation that we would actually invite them to the farm. So they came, and it was exciting for me because I have a Cousteau, swimming in one of our pens and scuba diving. And I tell you, I was in shock when Mr. Cousteau came up from the bottom at a rapid rate, and he had a dry suit on. I guess he hadn't dove in a dry suit before. And he came bombing up to the surface, feet first. And my first thought was, oh my goodness, this Cousteau can't scuba dive. And my second thought was, please don't hurt yourself in my salmon pen. Yeah. That is not going to be a good story. But we had, because we were interested, we filmed it. And the producer came walking over to me immediately and said, tell me you're not going to use that against us. And for me, that was the first time that I'd realized that this may be a pre-written script. And there may be controversy here. I thought they were there to learn, to discover, to, dive in the pens. And I realize now that maybe this is pre-written and we're just here to fill in space. And, when I watched it, I would say, yeah, my concern was accurate. But that was back in 2009. And it's just kind of evolved over time. And I would describe it as this, there was controversy 20, 30 years ago. Aquaculture was new. There were many questions, and there were many gaps in knowledge. And as salmon farmers, specifically salmon, were busy, trying to perfect production methods and grow fish and keep them surviving in the natural environment. Some people were filling the blanks and filling these gaps in information. And over time, as you know the old adage, a lie is run around the world twice before truth even has its shoelaces tied up. You know, I think over time here, especially over the last 10, 15 years, a lot of these fictions have been corrected. So fact is catching up with fiction. And I think some filmmakers are not courageous to actually discuss this. So that's why we're seeing some filmmakers block dialogue in the film, because they don't want that narrative to confuse the script.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's really hard to insert yourself into there. And again, I feel bad for the audience, because they may be completely naive, like I was, to what can occur to make you have an opinion.
Oh, it's amazing. We watched the trailer again for a few of these, and the comment section is insane. They're just blindly, you know, what did they say? They should show this at every single school, and every teacher should show this to their kids, and this should be free and available to everyone, and required viewing and all this. Like, people just, they don't think, but they just think with their heart instead of their brains.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I like what Ian's saying, and I almost see it as part of a larger marketing campaign, documentary making. Yeah. It's a tool in the cycle that includes petitions and email marketing, and when it is that, as Ian says, it's more about, it's scripted. It's more about a means to an end versus exploratory, and I think that's what separates the two types of documentaries, as he's saying. So,
and you got to remember, every filmmaker, whether they're making documentaries or feature films or short films or sci-fi or whatever, every filmmaker to some degree, you know, thinks that they are Steven Spielberg and thinks that they are just the most important filmmaker, and my film is the most important, and it's out of my mind, and my ideas are, you know, golden, so don't mess with them. And I think there's you know, you need to have an ego to successfully work in the film industry, and that ego is going to come into play when you're doing anything like this. And so I think, you know, that's something that people don't think about either.
True.
Yeah, but, you know, yes, I am not a filmmaker, nor do I aspire to be one. But, you know, you would think that you would have the courage to test your hypothesis. You know, it's any good science experiment, test the hypothesis to see if it's true or not. And I mean, it's not supposed to be a fictional story. I mean, it's not a Star Trek story, right, where, you know, it's, you know, whatever the ending may be, you know, that you're playing with real people and real lives here. And yes, you may have an opinion, but have the courage to explore if your opinion or your perspective is based on fact. Over my career, I've done hundreds of farm tours, and I find it so satisfying that someone, you know, at least if they're coming out to tour the farm and visit the farm, they have an open mind, because they're coming out.
They want to learn.
They want to learn, and, you know, they may have questions, they may have apprehensions. Just a simple one is, you know, I've heard the fish are crowded in the cages and they have no room to swim, and then you come out and see it, and when you realize you can't even see a fish in the pen, you realize there's a lot of room there. And just this type of information firsthand that the audience could be seeing through the lens of a filmmaker would be helpful for them. I mean, when we hear the narrative, you know, fish cramped in these cages, and then the visual doesn't match the narrative, it makes the audience think. And I'll tell you that, you know, 99.9% of the people that have come out to the farms have said, absolutely, my perception has improved over what I thought was the case on, you know, a fish farm. And it's really, really satisfying. But we haven't had the opportunity to bring that to the masses. There's about 5 million people that live in British Columbia. And I often said, if I could just bring 5 million people out today to see the farm, my job would be done. I'd put myself out of work, you know. Right. And the only opportunity we have to do that is through social media and filmmaking. And, you know, unfortunately, if you look at, I think it's Eating Our Way to Extinction, this latest film, I mean, we've got names behind that from Hollywood, you know, that they have reach that we will never have. I don't know, Steve, your followership on social media, but I doubt it's tipping 1 million. And
not close.
yeah. So we just don't have that reach, and it's really disappointing when you can bring one person out at a time to a farm and improve their perception, and then you lose potentially 1 million that watched Netflix last night. You know, right. What a shame.
And it's the same thing, and not even just with films, with everything we've talked about before. The headlines. What makes a sexy headline? Like, hey, this farm is doing everything right and the fish are happy and healthy and they come up with a really good product. Is that sexier than, hey, this fish species is worse for you than bacon and you should avoid it because it'll, kill your family, whatever. Like, what's a sexier headline? What is going to draw more eyes? The negative headlines and the negative topics are just more interesting to people. They want to learn more about that. And so, that's also the battle that we have to fight. We're already downhill because we're trying to communicate positive information as opposed to negative.
Yeah,
it's already that
I'm
disadvantage.
I'm as guilty as the next, because I'll admit, in our local paper, we used to have a roses and thorns section. You ever seen those in the local paper where people just write in a thank you, or they write in, I hate you.
Oh, that sounds fun.
And I must admit, my eyes were lured towards the thorns rather than the roses, because it was just juicier and sexier, and it was clickbait.
People love drama.
That was the clickbait. Absolutely.
People love drama.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, the story we have to tell sometimes is very factual. It's very data driven. It's very science driven. And me just saying that has probably made someone fall asleep.
We're losing listeners.
Although our listeners are there are a lot of industry people and they're into that stuff. So maybe they perked up when you said that.
Yeah. But, the flip side of that is we have a great story to tell. There are so many compelling stories of why people have ventured into fisheries and aquaculture. And I find it fascinating. And it really is an emotional story. And that's what disappoints me, is we don't have an opportunity to put someone that, just looks the part, looks like they want to do something right, providing good food, and they want to talk about their job, their career, growing food, and they are not given the opportunity to talk about it in films like Seaspiracy and Eating Our Way to Extinction. And what a shame. And what a shame for the audience. And even if it is both of those films directed to a more vegan-friendly audience, I think even vegans like truth and fact.
Well, as long as it lines up with their narrative. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, I mean, cognitive dissonance, is that the word for information that just doesn't compute with your ethics or your ideology? But I still think there's an appetite for many people to expand their knowledge and just test themselves. And we're recording this in November of 2021, and we're still very much in a pandemic, and seems to be going on forever. And I think it's interesting because I must say, anecdotally, I don't think there's been much of a reaction to Eating Our Way to Extinction. And like I said, there's some big Hollywood names behind this that have been pushing it.
Yeah, and the production value is out of this world. I mean, it's a beautiful looking film.
Sean, are you a publicist for the movie?
I'm just saying.
Cutting that part out.
I'm just saying. Visually, it's stunning, which just gives it that more, it's more alluring.
Absolutely. But I wouldn't say that it's, hit the red carpet, in any significant way. And I just wonder whether, we're 2 years into a pandemic. News has been doom and gloom. It's been kind of a message of hopelessness and fear. And I just wonder now whether we're at the point where we're looking for a bit of hope. And we're looking for a bit of solution. And I think as we talk about even food security during this pandemic, that fisheries and aquaculture has an absolutely fantastic story to tell. So I think there's a real opportunity, and I think there's a real appetite, pun intended, for the audience and consumers to hear about solutions to these issues and to think about hope rather than just live in hopelessness. And that's what the aquaculture story delivers. So I'm, hey, if there's any aspiring filmmakers out there and true documentary makers that want to explore the issue from start to finish, please let's do it and let's make it the same production value that Sean is so excited about watching the trailer. Yeah.
So when we talked to you, first of all, I want to just say I couldn't even remember the name of the film, so I am definitely not a publicist for them. But when we talked to you on the phone a couple weeks ago, you told us some of the stories from your actual interactions with some of the filmmakers and some of these, you had some stories like you mentioned earlier about the 60 Minutes and then into some of these newer documentaries and some of your interactions. Can you walk through some of those stories just so we can kind of get an idea of what your experience was?
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to interrupt me so I don't babble on for the next hour and a half.
Oh, don't worry. I have no
Just-
problem
just-
with that.
Very briefly, I spoke to my experience with, my hero's son, Jean-Michel Cousteau. And a few years later with 60 Minutes, there was our critic and there was me. We shared the screen for 20 minutes. And it was interesting because that was one, and 60 Minutes really, they have to do their homework. And when they're caught out not doing their homework, they really are caught out. So I think we were on the heels of them being embarrassed by a certain document that was leaked but wasn't leaked. And so they were really, really wanting to do their research before they published, their show. And I remember the director, it was hosted by Dr. Sanjay Gupta, very intelligent man. And we had a great conversation on the farm. But the director had said to me, I must admit, we've been working on the story for 6 months, and you wouldn't believe the amount of rabbit holes that we've been sent down, as in the course of this. You should look at this. They do this. And it was complimentary. Ian, thank you for being open. Thank you for letting us, fill up a lot of these rabbit holes. But unfortunately, at that time, even though and we could go through a bunch of acronyms for fish viruses that have apparently entered into, farms in British Columbia. But that virus was ISA, infectious salmon anemia. And unfortunately, even 60 Minutes left it hanging at the end. Even when Washington, Alaska, and British Columbia had all confirmed that the ISA virus was not in the waters of British Columbia, they still left it open at the end that it just may happen. So even 60 Minutes I was disappointed with. But at least they had done the homework, on all the rabbit holes they needed to shoot down. A couple years after that, we filmed with W5. Same thing. They were hanging out with critics for 3 or 4 days around the farms, and we just called them and said, are you going to call us? Are you going to talk to us? And they did. But, Sean, in the end, it was a 24-minute program, and we appeared for 3 minutes. When it's a program about you, if it was about Sean's family, you would hope that Sean's family would appear in the majority of the film, not your neighbors that have never liked that fence that you put up. And that's how we felt. And I'll say I had introduced them to a few of our First Nation business partners that move fish for us and work for us as well. And they have a really, really compelling story to tell. I mean, I worked for 10 years in the small village of Clemtu, which was, all operated by our First Nation partners. They have a fantastic story to tell, and they're extremely involved in aquaculture. And I had the host of the show turn to me and just say flat out, you do realize this is just a courtesy interview.
Jeez.
Yeah. I don't know what you just said there, but I think I said something worse when he said it to me. And I just looked at my friend across the way that had just spilt his heart out for 10 minutes about how aquaculture is important to his family, knowing that he was never going to make it into the 24 minutes, and he didn't.
Oh, man.
And he didn't. And it just absolutely shocked me. So a few years ago, I had the great opportunity to move to Scotland with my wife and work for Mowi, my company in Scotland. And
tough gig.
Yeah. Well, it rains in British Columbia, and it rains in Scotland too. So, but it's a beautiful place. And I had heard that there were some filmmakers out on the sites with an activist, and one of our site managers was called, said, there's a camera out here, there's a drone, there's a scuba diver, there's something going on. We realized that, something was kicking off. About 5 days later, I got a call from somebody who gave me a name that I'd never heard of, said, I'm a filmmaker, and we've been about your sites with a critic, and I would like to meet you in about an hour on your salmon farm and talk to you. And I Googled the name, and I couldn't find any reference to that person whatsoever. So I just called back and said, I can't confirm who you are, so no, I'm not going to show up in an hour, at your beck and call. Well, it turned out to be Seaspiracy. And in the film, if you ever can manage to watch it, Sean, you hear him say, the big salmon farming companies wouldn't speak to me. And I thought, wow, that is a stretch of the truth, if anything. I mean, I didn't know who I was actually speaking to because the name, I find out now, was just an alias name. It wasn't the real name of the producer and host of the show. So there was no opportunity for me to appear. And in fact, it looks like we didn't want to appear, which wasn't the case at all. Again, opportunity lost. We did ask then, when we knew the show was coming out, we asked to appear through the association, the Scottish Salmon Association, and we were denied. Absolutely, the answer was no, you could not appear in our film. And if you look at it, there's enough minutes spent on talking about our business with some incorrect information that we could have corrected if the filmmaker was interested. And it's the same for the latest, Eating Our Way to Extinction, which was just released a few weeks ago. We asked to appear. And we were absolutely denied. I've seen the exchange. It is, you will not be appearing in our film, and we'll give you a sentence or two. So we just had to provide a sentence or two. And, you know, I don't know how you guys feel, but anytime I see a documentary about somebody or something and all I see is a sentence, I think, oh, you chicken. You didn't show up for the interview. Yeah. You wouldn't get on camera. You know, it does influence me in a negative 100%. Way against the character. And you know, that was the intent. We're just going to give you a sentence, and no one will know that we have denied you the appearance in our program. Again, what a shame. And I think just without courage, again, you know, to have the courage to explore the issue and test, you know, one's opinion, I think is vital in a true documentary, and that just hasn't happened. And yeah, like you say, reading the comments, you just think, has anybody, you know, that has commented in that thread critically thought about what they've watched? And I don't want to take away from the fact that everyone is allowed to be critiqued. Everyone is allowed to be questioned. We should all be questioning and critically thinking. And I think someone coming on the farm and asking me those critical questions and letting me respond is absolutely what should happen. Yeah. And it doesn't take away from some of the images and things we see in those documentaries that even I have an issue with. But from my own personal experience about our business of salmon farming, it was poorly represented because there wasn't a balance of perspectives at all.
Yeah, if there was any representation at all, it could have been altered or anything like that. Didn't you tell us a story before about some footage that was completely created for that didn't actually connect with anything that was going on any of the farms?
Yeah, we're looking to confirm this. So this would be exclusive to your program, but in the latest movie, Eating Our Way to Extinction, there is narrative that says that a salmon farmer wakes up early in the morning, even before the birds are up, just to get to the farm and spray a chemical cocktail on the pen. And for 30 years, I've never known that to be an occurrence. And I've asked my colleagues if anybody recognizes this scene. So it shows two fellas in the bush with binoculars spying on the salmon farm early in the morning. And we see a character on the farm with a garden hose. Yeah. Spraying what looks like something in a salmon pen, and the person has brand new protective equipment. It looks like it was just bought at Walmart that morning, and not a scene we recognize at all. So we've actually sent an inquiry to the director and the producers to say, you know, hey, this is concerning to us because it violates many health and safety protocols. It's not something we recognize. If this is occurring, we'd like to get to the bottom of it. Please let us know where this was filmed. And we haven't heard a peep back, which strongly suggests that this was produced to support a narrative that isn't true. And I mean, how frustrating is that? That first of all, you don't get the opportunity to appear on camera to talk about your business. Not only that, but it looks very clear that they've made stuff up just to, you know, complement their narrative that this is bad.
Yeah.
and you shouldn't like it. I might have to travel to California and visit one of the producers at their workplace and stick a camera in their face and ask them questions. Very Michael Moore style.
This is how you guys do this, right?
We have to check the returns at Walmart for protective gear and see if we can
Get all the receipts. Rifle through the garbage, get the receipts. All right, so thanks for sharing all of those experiences. Again, this is my second time hearing every one of these stories, and it's still surprising to me. I want to shift a little bit, and Steve, you can elaborate on this a little bit on the impact to the industry, what the reaction has been, kind of how it's been handled from our industry's point of view. Steve, when these first started coming out recently, what did you notice was happening in regards to the industry itself, and kind of what the response was?
Well, it's part of my job is monitoring the media, and I track media mentions for Global Seafood Alliance and its brands, but also aquaculture and fisheries, seafood in general. Mm-hmm. And when you track media mentions for a documentary like Seaspiracy, it's tens of thousands versus maybe thousands for anything that we would consider to be positive on aquaculture. So it kind of becomes like a numbers game. Once you get backed by, as Ian was saying, someone who has a big following, like a celebrity, or get your product into a streaming service like Netflix, you're playing a numbers game. You're getting out there so much with your message that it can tend to overwhelm the work that I'm doing or Ian's doing or any communicator in seafood is doing. So I think that's what's frustrating about it. They're sometimes just playing the numbers game. So
did you see? I know that now and this might just be because of my search history and my history in my web browser, but when I searched Seaspiracy, just that documentary name in general, the majority of the articles that I found were actually rebutting a lot of the information in there and clarifying some of the questions, totally. Which is, did you notice this initial wave of like support for all of those ideas that was followed by this almost larger wave of, I don't want to say combating them, but correcting them? Is that what you noticed?
Oh, definitely. And sometimes really, really in depth. I think it was Ray Hilborn at the University of Washington and his team with a very, very detailed response to Seaspiracy. And even our own, now the Responsible Seafood Advocate article, that article on Seaspiracy was by far had more traffic than any other article ever. So a documentary like this can draw attention to the work that we do and to the work that Ian does. It gets more notice because people are now searching for
the truth.
They're searching for other opinions.
Yeah.
And that brings our opinions out there more than they would normally get out there, I think.
And I think it's a logical response to that kind of movie that has excluded your voice. I mean, Ray Hilborn and the rest didn't have a voice in that movie. That perception or that perspective wasn't included. So I'm glad to see both fisheries and aquaculture strongly respond and balance. And, I often talk to people that have heard kind of the negative side about seafood and fisheries and aquaculture, and they'll say, I understand the truth is in the middle somewhere. And that scares me because I'm like, whoa, that is so far over to this side. I can't stretch it so far over the other side that it's going to be
right
accurate in the middle. Yeah. So, we do have to quickly respond to these things and make corrections. Otherwise, again, a lie has run around the world 3 times before truth has its boots on.
Yeah.
Right. You can't ignore it.
So, no. Steve, you mentioned in the beginning of this episode, how we should be taking a more proactive approach to this as opposed to reactive. I think, seeing that wave of initial support for them documentaries, and then the second wave of people looking for other opinions, that is a very reactive reaction, reactive approach to this. What can we actually do to be more proactive? Because let's be honest, this is going to happen again, right?
Oh, it is. Just not waiting for anything. I mean, whatever your strategy is with communications and marketing, just actively getting your messages out there. I know we do that at the Global Seafood Alliance, and most of the major seafood players do the same thing. I think better now than 20 years ago when I started in this industry. I think the industry's gotten a lot better about that. And that media and through the internet and spreading information is just so much easier now than it was years ago. So there's really no excuse in this day and age not to be proactive in them. The negativity it's coming, it will be there. But if you're countering it before it even gets out there and consistently pushing out your messages, then, I think that's the best approach.
Ian, do you have any opinions on that?
Well, I have an opinion on everything, Sean.
That's why you're on this show. And I guarantee this is probably not the last time that you're going to be on this show. So get ready for another email from me, by the way.
Brilliant.
We love your opinions.
I know there's a hunger out there for information, and we talked about science and fact and detail that may be boring, but there is an audience for that, and there's also an audience for those emotional storytelling stories. So, like Steve says, there's an appetite to tell these stories, and we need to find the channels that deliver it to that audience, and we need to, let's give them credit. Like you said, the production value of these programs that are critical about us are high end. They're well connected, they're well distributed. We need to be doing, well marketed, and we need to be doing some of that work. There was a study launched today from Dalhousie University here in Canada that talked about kind of acceptance of farm seafood in Canada. And it shows, despite the headlines that have occurred in North America and Canada over the last decade, that most people prefer farm-raised seafood from the ocean. And as we debate land-based and ocean-based and all, but the clear message was they felt very confused. I mean, there was just so many confusing messages. And I think, as seafood, we are one big family. It doesn't matter if you're farm seafood, wild seafood, with land-based, ocean-based, we're all providing seafood. And we want people to walk to the back of the store, head to the seafood counter, and enjoy a selection of different types of seafood. And we're competing with so many other foods and so many other messages that we need to collectively get together and tell a compelling story that delivers data, delivers science, and delivers it in an emotional, understanding way to the audience. And if we don't fill that gap in this thirst for knowledge, others will do it for us. And let's not give them the opportunity. And let's always show up when we're given the opportunity to speak on ourselves. And we'll continue to do that if we're given the opportunity. But I'll tell you, when we're not given the opportunity, we will make that very clear to the audience so they're aware that we were blocked from the discussion.
Right. And Sean, to answer what you had asked earlier about the impact of shockumentaries, seafood sales, especially at retail, were through the roof last year.
Yeah, and we've talked about that.
North America.
The percentages of retail from grocery stores, especially particularly frozen seafood, those numbers were not believable. We didn't believe them at first. They were ridiculous how much they went up during the pandemic.
Right. Just because of the negativity, the other factors that affect what people are eating at home and away from home doesn't really change. So.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Saying that, though, for aquaculture, you need a place to grow the fish. So, we've often seen the market grow, 4 to 6% a year. And yes, throughout this pandemic, those numbers have been outrageously encouraging as well. But we do need to maintain social license in areas where we operate. We need to grow the fish somewhere, whether it's on land or in the ocean. You need that social license. And, a negative narrative over time, it influences people. So it's enlightening to see this new study of over 10,000 people that say, despite these headlines and despite these very political decisions that aren't based on science that have occurred here in Canada, at least, that consumers appreciate knowing where their food comes from, and farming gives you that traceability, and they like fish from the ocean. That's, they enjoy that. So we need to continue to be open, transparent. And I think I said in one of my articles recently that I've always been proud to work in a sector that, despite, some data being used against them or manipulated, we continue to provide data for the public just to be transparent, far more than any other sector or food sector, terrestrial foods. And even though it's discouraging when someone takes your data and manipulates it, I still am proud to work with a bunch of very honest people that just want to do the right thing, grow healthy food, and make sure the consumer knows where it comes from.
Yeah. You got to wonder, too, if there's a laziness associated with that, right? Like the message that these documentaries are pushing is for very big change, lifestyle change for a lot of people. And it's easy to be an armchair activist and anonymously say what you're going to say on the internet. But for people to actually change and stop eating seafood or eat less seafood it's a pretty big ask. So I think we do have that on our side. That the routine of regular seafood consumption is definitely on our side. We are getting low on time, but Steve, I know you had a couple final thoughts that you really wanted to make sure we hit on. So why don't you go ahead and discuss those, and then Ian, if you have any final thoughts too, we'll give you the floor as well.
Yeah, I just I think I don't know about you, Ian, but just fascinated by the rise of the vegan movement, and just fascinated by it. And not saying anyone's right or wrong, and I really truly do think there's room in the marketplace for all these different types of products, including our own products, farm seafood. But it's just this activist kind of transitioning from education to entrepreneurship to me, is really what set the vegan community on fire. And you really have a lot of these entrepreneurs, a lot of whom are coming from Silicon Valley, and they're they believe that technology is the ultimate solution to social problems. And they think animal agriculture, whether on land or at sea, they kind of see it as inefficient or outdated and in need of disruption. So, there's just, I feel like the billionaires have just been wooed by this pragmatism and these educators turned entrepreneurs. And it's just started really flooding money into not only startups, but into the NGO community, and which has been much more savvy about marketing and kind of this line between nonprofits and for-profits is kind of blurring. And I think maybe that's where more the negativity that we're finding now about aquaculture, I feel like a lot of it's coming from that. So I just think that's something worth noting when we think about where is the negativity coming from? Why is that? And interested to hear your thoughts on that. Just something I follow closely. And again, not saying anyone's right or wrong, but I just think it's an interesting phenomenon.
Well, I mean, there are many vested interests, and I have a vested interest of why I got into aquaculture. I mean, I shared that. I thought, we were overfishing, and I wanted to be a part of that solution, and that's how I feel 30 years later. And to make it clear, I have no problem with vegans whatsoever, but generally, that's fine. They have a vested interest. Just be honest about it, from the outset. If you're going to create a movie that is pushing the vegan lifestyle, just be honest about it, and then I can deal with it. But whether you have a house on the shoreline and you don't want to see a salmon farm, or whether you're a commercial fisherman and you find it marketing competition. I mean, everybody's got this interest and vested interest in the business, and I'm fine with that. Just be honest about what your interest is. But I'll just go back to what I said maybe halfway through the program, and I just think we're at this point, and a bit of a tipping point, where people are looking for hope instead of hopelessness, where people are looking for solutions instead of, just living in fear. And aquaculture absolutely ticks so many of those boxes for so many people. So I think there's an opportunity to tell our story, and that's one of hope. And it complements commercial fishing very, very well. So it will be fisheries and aquaculture in the future. There will be critics, and there will always be critics. I just hope, as we've discussed in this program, that we have the opportunity to have the dialogue, so people that aren't close to the issue can just make a decision based on what they know, and that's, I think, all we ask. Let's see if it can happen.
Very well said.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, Ian, one of how we usually wrap up the show is any listener that would like to learn more or may have some questions for you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
I'm listed on the website. You can contact me through the website, and I'm also on LinkedIn, which I like to share opinions on LinkedIn and have dialogue. So please connect with me there, and we'll look forward to that dialogue if it happens.
And Steve, how would you prefer people to get in contact with you if they want to talk to you about any of this?
My GSA email, LinkedIn, WhatsApp.
Or you can reach Steve through us. we work. We're like two doors down the hall from him. So you can email us too.
I'm not harmed to find. I'm one of those idiots who puts their cell phone on the internet because I don't want to miss an opportunity to talk about something seafood related.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us for this topic. I'm sure it's a topic that we will revisit at some point.
Yeah.
And Ian, we'd love to have you on again, talk about all kinds. There's plenty of stuff that we could talk about with you. So we really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
I'll look forward to it. Thanks very much, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. That was really good stuff.
Folks, that was our conversation with Ian Roberts from Moe and Steve Hedlund from here at GSA. As always, we hope you enjoyed the episode. I know I did. It was a fascinating topic. I was really into it. We hope you learned something, and we hope you can spread the message that we're trying to send with this episode. So remember, if you want every new episode directly downloaded onto your device as soon as it's available, you need to subscribe to Aquademia wherever you get your podcasts.
And again, follow us on Twitter at Aquademia Pod. And if you want to reach out to us for any reason, do so by filling out our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast.
And finally, if you like our show, please leave us a rating and review on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on.
And one last reminder for this episode, if you love this episode and you think it's important and you think the mission is worthy of it, please go ahead and share this wherever you find it, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. If any episode should go viral, this is definitely one of them. So please feel free to share this episode or any other episodes in the past or future that you enjoy from Aquademia and help grow the community. We really appreciate that. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time.
Ciao.
Bye.